Yud Amud Aleph, the Gemara right at the top of the Amud. We discussed in the Mishnah the machlokes between Rav Yossi and the Chachamim. If something that is owned privately, can that item be donated to the tzibur to be used as a korban tzibur? So the Gemara discusses this further by bringing a Mishnah Masechet Tanis. Zok the Gemara Ma'ara Zman Atzei Kohanim Va'am Lehi Monais. Why did the Mishnah count the 9 days where there is families, different families of the Kohanim that used to bring an adova of the eitzim for the mizbeach, for the marocha, for the firewood that will be burnt on the mizbeach? What's the reason for that? Anybody could make an adova of eitzim if they wanted to. Why did it list specifically these 9 families? Ella shebeshah shal Yisrael min hagoyla, when Klal Yisrael, when they came to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, v'lo yimatzu eitzim b'lishka, and they did not find any wood, firewood in the lishka, v'amdu ela ve'nisnadvu eitzim mishalasu, and these families donated wood from their own, from their private, from what belonged to them. U'masaram l'tzibur, and they donated it, they gave it over to the tzibur, v'karva mehem korbanos tzibur, and the Kohanim used the wood to be makar of the korbanos tzibur. V'hisno yimoim neviim shebeineim, and the neviim amongst them made a tanai, and they said, "Shafilo lishka malay eitzim," even if the lishka is full with wood, va'omdu ela v'nisnadvu eitzim mishalason, and from these families, if they make an adova of their own from the wood, then we say shelo yehei korban miskarav el mishalahen tchila, that what we use for the marocha, for the firewood, is what they donated first. It's priority. Their donation gets priority, goes first. So what do we see over here? We see over here that someone who can take something owned privately and donate it to the tzibur for the purposes of a korban tzibur. So here you see that this is a case also when this is a case where you can donate something privately to be used as a korban tzibur. Omar Rabbi Acha says the Rav Yossi, that must be the shita of Rav Yossi. That Rav Yossi says that you can do it. Rav Yossi, he says, like we learned in our Mishnah, that if a person wants to volunteer to be a shemer chinam to protect the svichim in the shas of shnas shmita, he can, even though if he has to protect the svichim, the grain, the produce that's going to be used for the aymer and the shtei lechem, even if he means that he'll have to take it and take it from Hefker and it belong to him, and he'll be donating his own item to the tzibur, it's still kosher a korban tzibur. You see here also that this is a shita of Rav Yossi, that one can be minadev, something owned privately for the purposes of a korban tzibur, and it's considered to belong to the tzibur. Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Ilah, but Rav Yossi, the name of Rabbi Ilah, says no, dira koli. It's lav davka, the shita davka of Rav Yossi, it could be even according to the Chachamim. Mapligin. So we could say that where do they argue the Chachamim Rabbi Yossi? That's beguva shel korban. That's like the case of our Mishnah, where you're taking the grain itself to be used for it itself is going to be used for a korban. But over here in Tanis, what are we discussing? We're discussing firewood, which is not the korban itself. It's only a hechsher for the korban. Aval machshira korban. Well, in the case of the firewood, it's only machshira korban. Kol amamayde shu mishtana korban yachal korban sibor. Everyone would agree that you can transfer it from a korban of a yachid to a tzibur, that it can be transferred. It's only a question. It's only a shaila and a machlokes by where the item itself is going to be used for the korban. Another Mishnah or Brisa that discusses this inyan of something private being given over to the tzibur. Tani isha shalsa kasayanes levino, a woman who wants to make for her son, and she wants to make it for her son as a kind gadol, and she wants to make the kasayanes for him to use in the base of mikdash. So she's ksher. She can make it herself, and she can give it over. Bavachet misarna l'tzibur. As long as she gives it over to the tzibur, it's kosher, and we're not chayshish loitim sarana yafi yavan, that she's not going to give it wholeheartedly. We're not chayshish for that. We say as long as she gives it over to the tzibur, we can assume it's done wholeheartedly, and therefore it comes from the tzibur, and it's kosher for the big day kahuna. So again, you see something that's private can be given over to the tzibur, to be used for the tzibur. Amar Rabbi Yacha, he says, Rabbi Yosi, he says again, that's a shita of Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi Amrav writes in Bestad of Shem Rechinam, like we learned in our Mishnah, that even a Shem Rechinam, because even if he is kinda from Hefker the produce, he can give it over to the tzibur. But Rabbi Yosi B'Shem Rabbi Yila, again, he says, no, Divra Koli. Again, you can say that it's even according to the Chachamim, because Maplig, and where do they argue? The Chachamim of Yesi beguva shel carbon, aval b'machshir and carbon, but machshir carbon kolama maydeshu mishtana carbon yachal carbon tzibur. But if it's only machshir carbon, everyone agrees that you could transfer to the tzibur. So now, coming back to the case of where we had the firewood that was donated for the Ma'arocha. Maslisa pliga al Rabbi Yosi. This brisa argues with the explanation of Yosi b'Shem Rabbi Ila that says that the firewood is only considered to be machshira korban and not considered to be a korban itself, because we learned oisan yomim no hagim b'shas korban v'shleim b'shas korban. These dates where these mishpachas donated their eitzim to the Maracha, they kept it as a Yom Tov, and they kept it as a Yom Tov, meaning it was also Betanis, a Mahesped, etc. And it was noig at the time with the Karbonos, at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, or even when there was no Beis HaMikdash, they were still noig these days as a Yom Tov. Rabbi Yosi says, Eino nohagim ela b'shas karban bilvan. Rabbi Yosi says, no, it's only noig at the time of the Beis HaMikdash. But Al Kolpanim, you see that they all agree that at least Al Kolpanim at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there was a Yom Tov. It was also Behesped Tanis and a Malacha. So that would only be if this was considered a korban, not machshirei korban. It says that by a korban, a person who brings a korban, then for him it's a Yom Tov. Like the Yerushalmi himself says, Ein bedin shetei also malachcha v'karbancha karev, that your carbon, you're the mark of your carbon, and you should be Isaac and Malacha doing work. Now, this is only if we consider the firewood to be a gufa carbon. If it's only a machshir carbon, it wouldn't have been a yontiv. And we can see also from the following that the firewood is considered to be a carbon, not just a hechsher carbon. Because I'm Rabbi Elazar Tzaddik, ben Binyamin. We were the descendants of Sana ben Yamin. And V'chal means Sano from the Shevet of Binyamin. V'chal Tisha B'Av liyos b'Shabbos, and Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbos. So they were doichet, and V'dachino oisal l'motzai Shabbos, and they were doichet Tisha B'Av to the next day, so to begin of Motzai Shabbos, which is the 10th of Av. Now the 10th of Av was their Yontiv. V'hayin misanim v'loy mashlimim. Now, so it comes out that there was the Tanat Sibor of Tisha B'Av, but it was their private Yontiv of Yud B'Av, and it was their private Yontiv of their day that they brought the Eitzim. So they had a conflict. So they fasted, but they weren't mashlim, they didn't complete the fast. Now, if it would be a hechsher korban, you wouldn't say that they would have a yontiv, and even more than the previous case, you wouldn't say that they would be noig a yontiv and not be noig the fast of Tisha B'Av. Elamai, you must say that this is considered for them a yontiv because it's a gufa korban, not machshir korban. And therefore, they were Mesana B'Loi Mashlimin. So you see from the following that we don't consider it to be just a hechsher korban. So according to this, we would have to say that when we say that they can donate it, and it's now given to be as donated in the wood, and it's considered to be a korban sibor, is like the shita of Rav Yosi. We learned in the Mishnah, they used to buy it, purchase it from the funds of the Lishka. So we say that this must be the shita of Rabbi Shmuel. The Rabbi Shmuel Aimer Eina Aimer Haba min Hasuria, that you cannot bring the Aimer from Chutz La'aretz, even from Syria you can't bring it. It has to come davka from Eretz Yisrael. So we'll see as we go through the Gemara that where we see in our Mishnah that it has to come that davka from Eretz Yisrael. But before we bring the raya that our Mishnah is Rabbi Shmuel, the shita of Rabbi Shmuel, we bring down the following. Tamantanina, we learned in the Mishnah in Menachos that says Kol Karbanos Hayachin V'Hatzibur, all the Karbanos Hayachin V'Tzibur, Boim Min Ha'aretz and Min Ha'chutz La'aretz, can come from Eretz Yisrael and even from Chutz La'aretz. Min Ha'chadosh and Min Ha'yashan, it can come from the old grain and even from the new one. Chutz Min Ha'ima U'Shnei Alechem, except the Aimer Shnei Alechem, She'ein Boim Ela Min Ha'chadosh and Min Ha'aretz. The Aimer Shnei Alechem has to come Dafka from Eretz Yisrael, and they come from the new crop, and the Aimer is the barley, and the Shnei Alechem is the chitim, is the wheat, and that's matir the chodesh. But they have to come dafke from the chodesh. Other korbanos can come from the chodesh and the yashan. After the makr, the Aimer Shnei Alechem, they can come from chodesh and yashan. They come from Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. But the Aimer Shnei Alechem is dafke Eretz Yisrael and chodesh. So Rav Huna b'shem Rabbi Yirmiyah, he said that's the Rabbi Shmueli. That's a sheet of Rabbi Shmuel who says that Rabbi Shmuel Omar ein Aimer ba min Asuriya, that Aimer cannot come even from Syria, it has to come from Eretz Yisrael. Another Mishnah that follows the Shita of Rabbi Shmuel, Tamantanina, we learned in a Mishnah. So we learned for the Mishnah in Kalim, Eser Kedusha, saying there are 10 levels of Kedusha. Eretz Yisrael Mekudesh is Mikol HaRotzos. Eretz Yisrael has more Kedusha than any other land. Umahi Kedusha also, what is the specific Kedusha? Shemevim Mimena Aimer V'Bikurim Shtei Alechem, that Aimer V'Bikurim Shtei Alechem has to come Davka from the produce of Eretz Yisrael. Mashe'ein Mevin Bekain Mikol HaRotzos, which is not so from other lands. You cannot bring the Aimer Shtei Alechem Bikurim from Chutz La'aretz. Rav Chia b'shem Rabbi Yirmiyah, he said, Rabbi Shmuel, that must be following the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel. The Rabbi Shmuel Omer ein Aimer ba min Asuriya. He said the Aimer does not come from Syria. Tamon Tanina, we learned also in the Mishnah in Shvias that it says, the Torah says that it's also to be chayrish and kaitzer, plowing and harvesting on Shabbos. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, he says, it says v'chorish v'kotzer tishbais. So we being a comparison between chayrish, between plowing, and kotzer and harvesting. Ma charish rishus, just like charish, plowing is rishus. There's no case of charisha, plowing, which is a mitzvah. All charishas are rishus. The Torah is not obligating you to be chayrish. So avkotzer rishus. So the case where the Torah says that it's also to harvest on Shabbos is a kotzer of rishus. Now, even though there is a case of ksira, which is a mitzvah, that when the Torah asers the katsira on Shabbos, it's similar to harisha, which is a rishus, a case of katsira of rishus. So avkotzer rishus iyasa ksira aimer shu mitzvah. Now ksira sa aimer, it's not only the bringing of the Aimer, it's also the harvesting. The Ketzira itself is a mitzvah. That is mutar on Shabbos. If it turns out that the Tes Zayin of Nisan is Shabbos, the Ketzira of the Aimer is mutar. Rabbi Shmuel Kedaita, that's Rabbi Shmuel following his own Shita. The Rabbi Shmuel, the Omar ein Aimer ba min Syria. The Rabbi Shmuel says you can't bring the Aimer from Syria. And Kedaita, the Omer, Yotzak Sir Aimer, Shu Mitzvah. And it says similarly that Yotzak Sir Aimer, which is a mitzvah, and that is Deicha Shabbos. So now the Gemara will explain. So if we say that the Ksir HaOimer is Deicha Shabbos, so the Ksir of Oimer is Deicha Shabbos, that means that for the Ksir of a mitzvah, we're Deicha Shabbos. Similarly, we would say that the Shabbos, and the 7th day and the 7th year in Shemitah, we would say that the Ksira, even though it's also to work the land on the 7th year, on Shemitah, but the Ksira of a mitzvah, the Ksira of the Aimer, would be Daiche, the Isra Shias. Man Tana Shemis Fichet. B'Shvias, Neitlim Schar Mitrum Salishka, who's the Tana that says that the watchmen who guard the Svichim on Shvias get paid for Salishka, meaning that we allow you to use on the Shemitah year, we allow you to harvest from the produce of Eretz Yisrael, even though it's the Shemitah year, but we allow the Ksir because it's the Ksir's mitzvah. So it must be Rabbi Shmuel. It must be that it's Rabbi Shmuel, because if it wouldn't be the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel, you could say, therefore, that you can bring the produce from Chutz La'aretz. Why would we say that we would allow the ksira? Must be that it's Rabbi Shmuel, who says that you can't bring the produce from Chutz La'aretz. It has to come from Eretz Yisrael. And it comes from Eretz Yisrael, and ksira's mitzvah is mutter, even on the Shvius here, so it must be Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Yaisa, he said, no, Divrei Koli, it's Divrei Kol. Why is that? Because Loi Matzah B'Surya Mevi'en Ois Mesich Beretz Yisrael. Because I'll tell you perhaps that it could come from Chutz La'aretz. It's not Dafka the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel Gabi Omer that it has to be from Eretz Yisrael, but we say that if you can't find it from Surya, then would we not say that you could also bring it from Eretz Yisrael? So therefore, we say that we allow you to pay the watchman because it might be needed for the mitzvah of Aimer. Now, if you don't need it, then and perhaps you can buy it from, bring it from Chutz La'aretz, but you might need it, and therefore we can use the money from the lishka for that purpose. Ha'hein Aimer ma'ushi yisra betchila. The more has a shaila about the Aimer. Can you plant it on the Shemitah year? We learned previously that the harisha can be done, that the harisha is a mitzvah, and therefore it can be done even the Shemitah year, and even if it means doing it in Eretz Yisrael, the need might arise to use the produce of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore we say that you can do the harisha in the Shemitah year. What about the zriya? What about the plant? What about if there are no svichim around, there's nothing that is grown on its own, there's no aftergrowth, there's no svichim, can you plant on the Shemitah year in Eretz Yisrael for the purpose of the mitzvah of the Aimer and the Shtei Alechem? Rabbi Chia Barada, boy, Kumi Rabbi Mana, so he asked a question before Rabbi Mana, so he said, Loi Nimsa Kikaim Sal Shiraim Shen Ne'acholim, isn't this similar to a case of a person does the kaimetz for a kimitza for Shiraim Shen Ne'acholim, a korban mincha, the kohen does the kimitza. So he removes the kaimetz. The kaimetz is burnt on the mizbeach, and the remainder of it, the shiraim are ne'acholim. The halach is, however, if after the kimitza is done, prior to the haktorah, if the shiraim became tomeh or became lost, meaning there's no shiraim to eat, so then the mincha is possible, becomes a mincha which is possible. Well, similarly over here, even if you're going to allow this riyah, the planting of it, in order to bring the minchas ha'ayman, but you won't be able to eat it because it'll be a produce. It'll be from the from the grain that was planted be'isser on the Shemitah year. Now, even if we would say that for the purposes of the mitzvah that you're allowed to plant it for the havah, but you won't be able to eat it. So isn't it similar to this case over here of a mincha where the shirayim became tomei, where the shirayim are not edible before you're marked to the kaimetz? So this should be the same thing, and therefore in any event it should passel the oimer, the minchas oimer. Omrli said to him, no, you can say that it should be similar to the following case. Why wouldn't we compare it to 5 things that are brought betuma but are not nachal betuma? And now that includes the minchas oimer. So if the tzibur is tomei, then you bring the minchas ha'aymer. Now, you won't be able to eat it. The tumah is hutra b'tzibor for do the avodah, but not to allow you to eat it. So that would be a case where it's brought b'tumah, but it's not nechal and it's not eaten. So here, similarly over here, it should be similar, comparable to the case where you can bring the aymer, but you can't eat it, and it should be a case like the case of tumah, which is kosher. So we haven't resolved the shaila. So it said in the Mishnah that we pay the Shaimrim, we pay them on the Shemitah year from the Shekalim that they were tired from the Lishka. So Ketzin, who always say, how do you pay them? It's not because to pay them, the watchman, directly from the money from the Lishka, to pay him with that money. You can't be mechalet on the produce that's growing on the ground, because you can't be mechalel on karka, or mechumra karka. So what's the process by which you pay the watchman with the shkolim? So the Gemara explains that neitel mos min shulchan. the hektish borrows money from a banker, from a money changer, and they give the money to the kaisrim, the ones who harvest on the shemim, actually yikav aimer, prior to the aimer being brought. Then maybe mois v'trumas halishcha, they bring money from the trumas halishcha, and when it's time to be makav the aimer, they would take this money from the shkalim, and they would be machalo this money on the aimer, on the mincha itself. So therefore, now the shkalim becomes chulin, and they would pay back the money changer. They would lend them the money. They would pay him back with these shkalim, which were already where they were paida, which are now chulin. They pay back the money changer with these shkalim. In fact, the more V'tov is saying this is the proper way to do it. They're giving an amount of shkalim that was paid to the people who planted and harvested, but what they plant and harvest is not the same amount that you're going to use for the oimer. What they used for the oimer, they used that even though they were harvested 3 saw of the grain, they used to sift it and refine it so much that it was only a serious haifa that was used for it. So most of it was not used for the actual mincha. Now, how are you going to now take shkolim, which was equivalent to the amount of what they harvested or they planted and harvested, when that's not the amount that's going to be used for the actual minchas ha'omer? Rabbi Yesi b'shem Ravach b'shem Rabbah. So he said in the name of Rabbi Ba, Kol ma she'itein hein hein dam ha'mishah rishona. He said what was paid to the watchmen, to the people who harvest to begin with, was the money not for the 3 saw. Was based on the amount that was actually going to be used for the minchas ha'omer. That was what was given to begin with, and these are the shkolim. When we're paying the shkolim, we give them that equivalent amount, not the amount of the 3 saw. Tana avonim ken. And it was the same thing with the people who, in the case of the people, the stone workers. So the people who used to cut the stones from the mount, to chisel the stones, they did a similar procedure. They also had to be paid from the shkolim, but they were paid in the same manner. Keserois, they couldn't pay them from the money of hektish. They couldn't pay them directly from the money of hektish. So what did they do? They took money from the money changer and as an advance, and with that money they paid it for the people who cut the stones from the quarry. They cut it from the mountain, and they chiseled it in the stone cutters, and they cut it to size. And they paid that to them. They gave them in advance prior to them building it onto the wall, the row of stones on the wall. And once they put it on the top of the stones on the top of the wall, maybe they take the money from the Trumas Halishka, then they are Machala, they transfer the Kedusha from the Shkolim to the stones, and therefore they would take this money, which now is Chulin, and they would pay the workers with this money, which was now Chulin. And they paid them with this money that they were Machala with. Correctly, more the same Shiva saying, is this the proper way to do it? The amount of stones, that not all the stones are going to be used for the wall. Some of the stones got broken, some of them are inferior, some they don't use, so they cut, and they from the quarry they remove more stones, they chisel more, but not all of them are going to be used in the binyan. So it'll come out that they're being paid for actual stones more than the amount of the stones that are actually used in the binyan. So similar answer. Rabbi Yosef Shem Rachbe, Rabbi Yibun B'Shem Shmuel, Kol Ma She'yitein Hein Hem Adameh Mishal Rishona. What they're paid in the first place is the amount of stones which will actually be used for the binyan, and not more than that.